In this video, I really want to talk about summertime frog fishing. A frog is a lure that I have tied up with me no matter if I'm fishing a pond, a lake, or a river during the summer, especially if that body of water has some sort of vegetation. Vegetation is going to keep a lot of fish shallow throughout the year, but other things will also keep these fish shallow. Bluegill spawns will keep fish shallow, docks will keep fish shallow, and a frog is a great place to fish them. Now, I actually just spent almost the last like 3 or 4 days fishing a frog a lot. I mean, look at that bait right there, completely tore up. This one was brand new just a few days ago, and you can see that it is very tore up as well. So in this video, I'm gonna talk about a few tips when it comes to specifically summertime frog fishing. Now, before we get into it, this video is brought to you by Fin Fishing Apparel. And right now for the month of June, if you buy a USA made sun shirt, you actually get an absolutely free rod glove. This is a $10 product. Everybody who has the rod gloves absolutely loves them, and right now it is free with the purchase of a sun shirt. Now, I do not have an unlimited stock of rod gloves, although I have bait casters and spinning rods. So all you got to do when you're checking out, select the sun shirt that you want. Also select the rod glove that you want to make sure that what I have in stock I can send out to you. Shopping at Fin Fishing is truly the best way to help support this channel, and I greatly appreciate it. All right, now quickly, I want you guys to know that sorry for not posting for almost a week. I was at an event almost this whole week, and they were long days out there on the water. With that being said, there was a video I posted about a week ago that there's a part 2 coming out, which I'll share with you guys tomorrow. But I just had to talk about frogs. It's fresh on my mind from just fishing these baits so much. And there's just a few key little things when it comes to fishing a frog I think are very important when it comes to the summertime. Now, first thing that I want to talk to you about is length of cast. Your actual cast that you make can sometimes make a really big difference. And what I mean by that is that sometimes the longer this happens for not only frog fishing, but a lot of different types of fishing. You know, especially when you're fishing highly pressured bodies of water, especially when you're fishing in the summer. I believe that the furthest away from the fish that you can be when you present a bait to them can sometimes be your best opportunity to catch that fish. And like I said, this is for a number of baits, but it's absolutely true when fishing a frog. You know, over the last week or so, I was fishing in a lot of pretty thick vegetation. I'm talking lily pads, I'm talking this stuff that they call rice up in New York, milfoil, a lot of mixed vegetation, a lot of different mats. And what I noticed about almost every single frog catch that we, a couple of guys and ourselves had, they were almost a long cast away from the boat. Although these fish were kind of peppered all throughout this area, most of the time when you got bit, it was a very long cast from the boat. And if you think about it, when you're trekking through those lily pads, you're kicking up, you're constantly, you know, getting your trolling motor, going through them all. You're really kind of spooking a lot of the fish in the general vicinity that you're fishing, maybe 20, 30, 40 feet away from the boat. Now, sometimes fish are so aggressive, it doesn't matter. And sometimes they'll be right up next to you in all that junk and you catch a fish. But there are days like this past week where I really noticed the further away you could get that frog away from the boat, typically the more bites that you are going to get. Now, with that being said, another very important tip when it comes to frog fishing in the summer, not all frogs are created equal. You know, there's a lot of different frogs out there on the market. I'm holding 2 of my absolute favorites right here in my hands. This is a Spro bronze-eye frog over in this hand, and over here I have the Berkeley Swamp Lord. Now, I like the Berkeley Swamp Lord a little bit more than I like the bronze-eye frog. It tends to walk a little bit better in the water. I'm not saying a tremendous amount. It tends to walk a little bit better, and I feel like my hookup ratio is pretty dang good with this frog. With that being said, the hooks on this frog stick away from the bait. If you get them just fresh out the package, they stick a little bit further away from the bait, and the body is a little bit softer plastic. This bait was probably twice as hard to get through cover like lily pads than the Spro Bronzi frog. As a matter of fact, most of the time when I was bringing this through the stuff, I was getting it caught on a lot of that stuff. Ended up bringing that bait back to me with little particles of lily pads or other grass on them. Now, this thing can go through a lot of cover. I'm not saying that it can't, but what I'm saying is that the Spro Bronzi frog was a little bit better at coming through cover, at least this week. That frog came back to me in a much cleaner way. Now, you guys probably know this, but most of the time, if you have a little bit of crap, a little bit of grass, whatever it may be on your baits, a bass is not going to hit it. Like we see this with all kinds of different baits. That is especially true when fishing a frog. So if I made a long cast with this bait and it got a little stuff on the hooks, on the wherever it may be, sometimes the fish are not going to hit that. It's basically a wasted cast. So with that being said, pay attention to how different frogs come through cover. I'm not saying that you got to go out there and find every single frog out there on the market. I'm just saying that there's some that come through cover a little bit better. There are some that have a little bit better hookup ratio than others. For example, if I'm fishing in more open water, this frog right here, the Swamp Lord, like if I'm trying to skip it under docks, this thing is way better at skipping under docks than the Spro Bronzi. Can I still skip the Spro Bronzi frog? Yes, absolutely. But this thing goes under there better, and I feel like the hookup ratio is a little bit better. So there's kind of gives and takes with all these different frogs. But every situation that you fish out there on the water may call for a frog that is just a little bit different or that is actually better in that situation. So I know that frogs aren't the cheapest baits. I mean, a lot of times they're $9, $10, $11, $12, $13 for a frog. I do think that it's important, if you know you're going to be around a good frog bite, have a number of different brands with you. That way you can kind of go through them, kind of figure out which one is best for the situation that you are fishing. All right, great tip. Not all frogs are created equal. All right, let's go on to the very next thing, is that no matter what you do at times, bass are gonna miss a frog. It just happens. Like, it just happens. Like, there's no other way for me to really say it. One thing that you can do, and that seemed to be very important this week when we were out there fishing, is trimming up your legs pretty dang short. As a matter of fact, this right here, although this is about half of what comes in the package, this is probably about twice as long as I really needed them to be this week when I was fishing. It seemed like the shorter your frog legs were, the better that those fish were actually going to get that bite, especially when you're fishing around, you know, pretty thick, dense cover. You know, I got the chance to fish with Bailey Eggbrit this past week, and the frog that he was fishing had extremely short legs. I mean, I'm talking about a 1/4 inch on each side, maybe even if that. So really, it was really just the body itself. And so therefore, I felt like a lot more of the fish that were coming up and hitting his frog, he was getting that bait into. When I initially first started fishing the frog, I had fished this frog out in more sparse cover, had no problem hooking up. When I got into the thicker cover, I was having a little bit of issue hooking up. Trimmed up the legs even this much, and it made a big difference. I think if I had even gone a little bit more, it would have made just that much more of a difference. So if you are out there and you're fishing a little bit thicker cover and you have a problem with those fish missing the frog, try trimming up your legs. I know it sounds really simple, sounds even really stupid, but it just gives those bass a little bit more of a target. It gives the bass the target that the fish are now going to have is not the legs, it's actually a body where the hook is. So guys, those are a few frog tips when it comes to the summertime. There's a lot more that we could talk about when it comes to a frog, and I will talk about them, well, in some coming videos. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this one. See you in the next one.